Welcome to Cross Section, conversations at the intersection of faith, news and culture.
Well, hello and welcome back to Season 10 of Cross Section. This is episode 1B, you might call it, because we recorded a cracking episode last week, and but I got lost in all the, machinations of the internet. I don't understand how these things work, but whatever happened, we didn't have a usable recording. So we're back and we're slightly late. It is Friday morning. We're in the middle of Storm Owen, particularly if you live in Northern Ireland like I do. It's a red warning. Nobody's leaving the house. Schools are closed. It's about as severe as it gets, and it sounds like it to me, though apparently you guys can't hear it in the background, which is good news. And I'm joined by Danny and Alicia. So welcome, guys.
Great to be with you.
Hello, good morning.
Well, it's exciting. We are going to be discussing the big news, funnily enough, and we are going to be discussing Donald Trump, President Trump's inauguration, and the kind of vibe shift around that. What is happening? What does that mean for the rest of us? We'll be looking at some of the local stories. Southport, assisted suicide has been going back through Parliament. But we're going to kick off with a slightly different take on our way into the Trump story. Joe Rogan and Wes Huff. Alicia, you probably had more of the background to this initially than I did as to how this even came about, because some people may have listened to all 3 hours of this and think it's the greatest evangelistic apologetic moment of the last 10 years, and some people may have no idea what we're talking about. Give us a bit more context.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a niche conversation that has gone viral, is the perfect intro to the Wes Huff, Joe Rogan episode. So essentially, Wes Huff, he's American, Canadian, passionate, North American. I'll have that as the general. Canadian kind of apologist, really cares about manuscripts, scripture. Some of it is completely over my head. So I was brought into it initially through the initial conversation and pushback that he had with Billy Carson, where there was just conversation after conversation where he was correcting that host on his podcast for just errors in thinking, errors around manuscripts. And so Joe Rogan thought, this guy and his team thought, this guy, why not get him on the episode? Let's talk more about the Gospels, more about his areas in passion. And for 3 hours, Wes Huff kind of engaged with Joe Rogan and his audience on the gospel, manuscripts, archaeology, the biblical case for Christianity. And really, it was a gospel opportunity, a moment that I think in excess of 5 million people have viewed on YouTube. So it's an incredible conversation.
So Dana, are you one of the, 5.2 million last time I looked on YouTube alone, and then the podcast, I'm going to guess, has the same number again. My guess is we're talking at least 10 million people engaging in this kind of 3 hour conversation. Danny, are you one of those people? And
I am one of them. I'd missed it when it first happened. I'd missed the furore over him debating Billy Carson just before Christmas, I think, all the legal stuff that involved that. But so let's see his recommendation. I downloaded the podcast, and Friday and Saturday last weekend, I made my way through 3.25 hours of it. And then subsequently, I've listened to a couple of other discussions, and it is fascinating. The conversation is esoteric at parts. It goes into dark matter and universe and minutiae of kind of fragments of Old Testament and New Testament scripture. And like there's an interesting kind of side debate with some academic scholars that are criticizing him for some of the things he said, like on some of the really minutiae points. But the fact that this was on the world's most listened to podcast, the openness of the discussion was fascinating, the freedom and the space. And one of the things about Joe Rogan is that he is criticized sometimes for being a bit of a free speech fanatic. And he does give airtime to all sorts of views. But in this case, it meant that the gospel got incredible airtime, incredible opportunity for Wes Huff to speak about it. And he was engaging. Like, it's long. We have debates about cross-section, about how long we should be. Can we keep to 25 minutes? Can we keep to 30 minutes? This was 3.25 plus hours. Some people somewhere, and 5 million plus of them, are engaging with this kind of long-form production.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, Huff asks him basically at the end of these two. So as you say, it's all about manuscripts and texts and how reliable they are, and do we have accounts that are close to the time of Jesus? He brings him a papyrus thing that he's made because this is Wes Huff's area of interest. And then, I love at the end that he starts to really push and says, "So, what do you think of the historical person of Jesus?" And he's asking Joe Rogan, and Rogan's like, "Well, look, it certainly seems like there's a lot of people who believe that there was this very exceptional human being that existed. So the question is, what does that mean? Does it mean that he is the Son of God?" And he's definitely open to that idea. He said, "I know a lot of Christians," so he talks about his engagement with them, about Jordan Peterson. And actually, I like the way Wes Huff very gently kind of pushes back and says, yeah, although what Jordan Peterson thinks is interesting and might not be kind of, if you like, the orthodox perspective on this, and says it's great where he's journeying to, but we've still got some questions. So, and he keeps kind of just pushing, so what do you think, in a very gentle way. So I think in terms of a model of apologetics, it's fascinating that they have this 3-hour conversation. Rogan is Rogan. He goes off on tangents. He swears. He talks MMA, does things. And Huff's really good at just kind of, yeah, and coming back and bringing it back in. So I think from that point of view, really interesting. And it is a discussion on things that I had said previously very few people seem that interested in. Are the texts a reliable account of who Jesus is? Do we have evidence that he existed? Overwhelmingly we do. That he died, which overwhelmingly we do. And then the big question was that he was resurrected. And the evidence is there. And then I love the way Huff pushes in that question. Huge amongst young men in particular, not exclusively, but that's where, so one of the things the church has struggled with, engaging young men, and this is doing it in fascinating ways. Now, I think there's huge challenges and questions around the discipleship journey and what that looks like. You have a lot of people expressing interest in faith, from Jordan Peterson, Niall Ferguson, who we'll come to in a minute, Joe Rogan expressing an interest, and others. It opens a space. Their response is maybe not what we would expect. The journey into church and the necessity of community is something that I think is really important. But I have to say, I'm one of the people who says, look, I think this is the biggest apologetic moment of the last maybe 20 years. 10 million people engaging in this way in such a long format. I am fascinated.
And I think there's something interesting going on. I think for a few years, there's been a bit of a chat about apologetics in terms of, well, what are the questions that people are asking? Are they asking, is it true? Or are they asking, how does it make me feel? And I think there has been a shift, or there had been a shift into saying, well, actually, the questions people are asking is, how can I feel better? Whereas now I think there is more of a shift, again, to the, well, is it true? Can I believe it? And I think that's fascinating. Justin Brierley talks about the surprising rebirth of God and chronicles some of these stories and some of this account of what's happening. And I think people are searching for truth and looking for answers that they can trust.
Absolutely. And I think that is going to be the conversation of 2025 in all different layers of politics. What is truth about a policy, an issue? How do we move forward as a nation? What's the truth of a story? And we'll move on in that. And I think it's an opportunity for the church and Christians to really lean in that, to say Jesus isn't just a moral figure in time, in history. He's the way, the truth, and the life, and that all of creation, politics, and kind of community is founded in that reality. And us as Christians have to give an account of the hope that we believe. So be brave and be courageous in leaning into these conversations where they arise.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think this is linked to is the vibe shift. And what is the vibe shift? Well, you two think I'm on an outlier in this one, but I do think there's this shift going on culturally, and it's a very quick shift. The election of Donald Trump is both the cause and effect of that, if you like. It feels like, so the people talk about the Overton window, what it is plausible to believe, and it does feel like, and more than feel like, there is a shift in what it is plausible to believe since the election of Donald Trump. One of those is in the area of faith. I think it's becoming more and more plausible. This isn't just linked to Trump. This has been a trend more recently to talk about faith in the public square, for public figures to do that. I've seen Tom Holland really, I think, at the front end of that conversation. That's led lots of other people to talk about it. But there's also a kind of then shift, and some people talk about it's like a return to reality. We want to get rid of the bureaucratic, the cowardly, the guilt. We want to move towards courage and joy. That's part of what the vibe shift is about. And then Donald Trump, in many ways, Elon Musk and the tech bros around him are not quite the manifestation of that, but I suppose they are, one sense, like where that comes to the fore. people ask me about it. We're chatting. Here's where I think it lands very concretely is somebody like Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. So previously fairly left of centre. You had Nick Clegg as one of his top officials. He was seen as being behind the Democrats and influencing elections on their behalf. As soon as Trump's in, he absolutely changed his gear. He says we're getting rid of our diversity, equality, and inclusion policies within our kind of programs within Meta. He says we're getting rid of our fact checkers and we're going to community notes, very similar to what X is doing. And he gets rid of Nick Clegg, and on comes Dana White, the UFC kind of fighter guy, onto his main board. Not a direct replacement for Clegg, but essentially that kind of represents the shift. And Amazon, Meta, McDonald's and Walmart all getting rid of some of their DEI programs and reflecting some part of this shift. So Danny, all of that takes us to Donald Trump, his inauguration, the new president. He has apparently solved the Middle East. He may not have solved it, but his influence has come to bear. He's already bringing his influence to bear on Russia, and he has signed hundreds of executive orders and done it live streaming and throwing out the pens as he goes in some sort of massive, big, real-time celebrity show.
Yeah, it's not politics as we expected. And I don't think anyone thought it would be. And in fact, I think the contrast between Trump 45 and Trump 47, the two terms he will hold, is going to be something that people study and comment on for many, many years. In 2016, 2017, when he came into office, he was the outlier. He was the renegade, whereas now the Republican Party has been reformed in his image so that he is the one who dictates what happens. He has the power within the party and therefore will have the power within government to get much more done. People who have been elected into Senate and the House of Representatives will largely have done so on his coattails. So I think that increases his influence. I think the theatre and everything, the combination, the power of Elon Musk, who has a White House pass, and his Doge Department of Government Efficiency, which he now has sole control of, is reportedly have tentacles in every government department looking for efficiencies and cost savings. So the way politics is happening is massively changing. I think my thought about the vibe shift is a lot of it is just real politics, whether that's globally and internationally, people reacting to the incoming presidency of Donald Trump to try and sort stuff out so that they're going to be in favor, they're going to get trade deals, or they won't get hit with tariffs so badly, or resolving conflicts. Or in the case of Meta and others, actually their own policy saying, oh, we've got to cozy up to the new government. That's just normal industry public affairs, but just happening on a really grand scale. So I think there's a large amount of it that is just real politics. I think the vibe shift part of it is that we're seeing a willingness to speak things and say things that people hadn't previously said. So the bluntness with which Donald Trump has spoken and signed executive orders, there are only two genders, DEI policies will be abolished across the board. It's just a different approach to things. And I think that is signalling a wider change in culture.
Yeah, there's talk of the preference cascade. This came about, I think, with the fall of the Iron Curtain and Eastern Europe. People said they held a set of beliefs, appeared to put up signs in the windows, etc. And then the moment it began to tip, everybody turned incredibly quickly, because it turns out they really didn't believe the things behind the scenes. And one of the questions is, and it was actually Dave McWilliams, an Irish economist and cultural commentator who is no friend of Trump, I heard commenting on this and saying, are we seeing the preference cascade? And is that what's happening? So basically, when the ideas were policed, everybody got on board with all these different agendas. He would say the woke agendas, and now there's going to be a shift because people never really believed them, and quite quickly a number of them will move and will change. Alicia, what's our thoughts on Donald Trump as the president, what he's begun to do already, and the speed at which he is moving?
I mean, I think coming back to Danny's point, there will be a time where we study this. I think it's an importance, particularly for Europe and for those kind of in the policy world in the UK, to kind of adjust and think, okay, what has happened in 4 years that a man so despised, that was before the Supreme Court, conversations of impeachment, so unpopular by all, both within the Republican Party and as well as those kind of patriots in America for all the kind of destruction and chaos that he caused, wins convincingly and wins in a way where he's pulling on different demographics that are like, we desperately want change. The Democrat kind of administration, though delivered economically strongly, for some reason there was a strong discontentment in terms of kind of believing in their policies going forward. I think that shift is something to be learnt and understood, and I think particularly European leaders, I think the Labour government are kind of in no man's land of how to embrace the Trump administration, given so much has been said in the past that has been direct about his character, about his leadership. And yet Trump is prepared to lead in such a way where it's like, if you're with us, amazing. And if you're not, you're on the outside. And he's quite brash with that. So it's a very challenging kind of landscape. And I think the conversation or the issue, I think what Trump in his persona, in his politics, in what he's offering the nation of America is he's really throwing into the long grass everything around identity politics. And I think that's the question that now Europe and the UK needs to really engage with, of how do we engage with identity politics and kind of preferring or kind of elevating different groups. But actually what we're seeing is that it hasn't led to unity, it's led to division, it's led to suspicion, it's led to, in some cases, to hate and increased xenophobia. How do we speak into that space with an alternative vision that isn't divide and conquer? So I think it's a very challenging time for geopolitics, but equally there's a lot for us to learn in Europe and the UK and how we engage with that, and particularly the church, how it engages in these difficult conversations, offering an alternative vision.
And I think there's a real need for discernment in this, and wisdom in that. I get the real politics of Republican candidates and spokespeople and even industry wanting to get in line and curry favor. But I think as the church, we have absolutely no need to do any of that. So there's the need to retain a prophetic voice to, yes, acknowledge where there are points that we might agree, but also be willing to say where we disagree and say, actually, that's not helpful. That's really unwise. And it has been interesting seeing the number of Christian groups speak out against some of Donald Trump's comments, particularly around refugees and the border. And I think what will be important for the church is having that discernment to be able to say, yeah, okay, there might be some things that we think are good in what's coming, and there are some things we massively disagree with, and we're going to continue to speak out on these because we're not interested in the power that Donald Trump has. And actually, I think that's going to be a really challenging thing for the church. And I'm not American. It's easier for me to say from where I am, but I think for church leaders and Christian leaders in the States to retain that prophetic voice, to call out and to criticize when necessary.
But interesting, certainly in my own feed, to see either people saying, great to see those pastors praying for him on the morning, but how awful to see Bishop Budd, is that how you say her name, the Episcopal bishop, and what she said, or the other side saying, oh, those kind of hypocrites in the morning, but so good that she called them out in the afternoon. It's like there seems to be no middle ground. You're either absolutely with her or against her, absolutely with the folks in the morning or against them. And there seems to be a very binary piece around that role of religion. You can see, certainly in my own feed, the divisiveness on that. Any thoughts on the bishop's words to Donald Trump? Mona, Alicia.
I thought it was a missed opportunity, coming in contrast to the Joe Rogan episode. You're going to have millions viewing in on kind of that conversation, your address, and to make Trump the center stage and not Christ, I think was a missed opportunity. So in that regard, yes, call for mercy, but how does Christ show us what mercy looks like? And it does engage in the very difficult element that he extends mercy, but his death on the cross was also fulfilling justice. And so there's a real difficult tension that you have to balance. It's not just mercy, mercy, grace, grace. So I thought it was a missed opportunity to talk about the person and the lordship of Jesus. So that was my one critique of her address, but I do understand why she would do that.
No, really helpful, and I think look, there's lots more we'll probably say on the vibe shift and what's happening as it goes along. I think there are really interesting things around it now. Ferguson had an article, and we'll probably post it in the links. There'll be an encouragement in this moment around having kids, going local, about embracing reality in terms of something like the male-female conversation, a move from secular liberal materialism to Western Christianity. But again, no, it's Western Christianity. So there is an uplift, I think, in Christian thinking, but it's a very particular framing around that. A move from credentials to human judgment. Some of that's information to wisdom, but some of that's just reject the experts and, go with your gut. Truth over lies. So some aspects of the vibe shift. And each one of those bits I'm going, yeah, I have some sympathy. I like bits of that. But there's other bits you go, yeah, but like there's going to be a much more, I think, pro-risk culture. We're going to go after things. But you saw the tech bros in the front row. You're like, there's a masculinity associated with that. I think at times you can hear it in the conversation already. Bits of that would be unhealthy. And I think Trump's just very simply on the issue of women. I think his election is deeply unhealthy from his character around women and what he has said and done around that. But then he also made an executive order that I think was really helpful in clarifying the male-female thing. It's difficult to hold those two things. And that is the meta-modern moment that we're in. Some would say you're moving from modernism that gave us certainty, that gave us a kind of clarity, and that gave us hope. And it was kind of sure of itself, and it was broadly kind of optimistic. We moved to a postmodern kind of engagement with culture that was much more ironic, that was about deconstruction, that ultimately led often to nihilism and hopelessness. What comes next? Some are saying it's an oscillation between the two, and there's a deep incoherence around that. So you see aspects of both coming, and I think we do see parts of that in culture. What I think that offers as Christians an opportunity to ground people into a story. So in a moment of information overload, we're calling you into narration, into a deeper story. And there is maybe an openness to that, and that's what we're seeing in Rogan. But also the search for meaning continues. And so we are going to see a level of incoherence that might be difficult for rational people like me. I'm going, I don't know how you hold those two things. You try and point it out, and people go, yeah, I just hold them. That's fine. I don't see the incoherence. They're just holding two contradictory ideas. That'll be a challenge to navigate through, but I think also a huge opportunity to call people into something. And navigating around Trump will be particularly challenging. With that, we will just remind you you're listening to Cross Section. Thank you so much for doing that. We are back with season 10. If you get a chance to like, review, rate, share this with friends, that would be much appreciated. You can, of course, get in touch with us. Email us a question. So we sometimes say email us a comment. Just email us a question or a story you're saying, why aren't you guys covering that? Or would you cover that this week? If you get that in around Wednesday, Thursday, we will have a look at that. You do that by emailing, he says, hopefully, cross.section@eauk.org. You can find some of us on social media and you can engage with us there. Look, in a story, in a week in which there's been stories about, is it Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips and how many people they've been able to sleep with to try and break records. We want to tell you something entirely different but linked. Relationships Matter, a series of resources from the Evangelical Alliance looking at the Bible, sex and sexuality. In that, we've got a 7-week video course that you can download, a small group course looking at that, looking particularly around sex, sexuality and same-sex attraction. We have affirmations that we have written in that area before and I've updated those. We have a guide that Danny was the lead author on that we put together on that. We've got a theological commentary on that. We've updated our transformed resource. So all of that is available at eauk.org. I'm pretty sure it's /relationships. But basically, if you go to eauk.org, our homepage, you will find those things front and center right now. Danny's going to tell me if I got the right link.
/sexuality.
Sexuality, of course, much more interesting to say /sexuality. So 7-week course is probably the highlight of that we would want to ask you to look at. This is where we set out what's happening in culture around this, what the Bible says, and why we're calling people into a relationship with Jesus and a better story around that. And we do absolutely believe the Bible offers that. It's not a defensive thing for us. This is not a kind of embarrassing thing. Oh, we have this weird belief. This is absolutely front and center. We think this is incredibly important. Culture has driven the conversation to sex and sexuality, and we're okay to talk about that and invite people into a deeper relationship with Jesus, who launched the first sexual revolution in the first century around how we do things differently. That's the end of my plug and my advert. We are coming to 2 stories as we wrap up, more local, things that are going on in the UK. First, Southport. And so we have seen the sentencing this week, I think 52 years, possibly. Danny, coming to you first because you nodded. So what we've seen a statement from the Prime Minister. We're going to see a public inquiry on this. What else can we say about what happened in Southport?
Well, we now know some of the details around the horrific attacks. Axel Rudakabana, I think is how you pronounce it, who was just shy of his 18th birthday at the time, horrifically murdered 3 young girls. And actually, the media have not reported all of the facts. I noticed on the news last night, they were deliberately saying we are not saying everything about this for the sake of the families. The attacks were so horrific. He has been sentenced to 52 years, which, as he was not 18 at the time, is, I think, the most he could possibly have been sentenced to. He couldn't have a whole life tariff, but it will take him to his 70th birthday in prison before he has any chance of parole. I think it was a horrific attack. There's no disputing that. I think there's been some discussion about, well, has there been a cover-up around this? Well, actually, mostly it was just because there were media reporting restrictions before the trial. So there were things that weren't said. And then once he pleaded guilty, more could be said. And then once he was sentenced, even more could be said. So I think to a large extent, it's not about a cover-up. It's about sensible reporting. But I think there are questions around any potential terrorism links or motivations. I think there are, like, Keir Starmer's come out and said that there needs to be further inquiries, investigations, reform to the ability to buy kitchen knives online without proving your age. I think there were a number of interventions in his earlier teen years that weren't followed up. So, like, where were things missed in the specific case, I think is important, but I think some of the reaction around it has emphasized some of this very polarized politics. People are looking for a bigger story sometimes. And as an aside, there has also been calls about should the death penalty be restored. A couple of Reform MPs have led that charge. I wouldn't support the death penalty being reintroduced in any circumstances, but it is possibly a conversation that we might hear more of in the coming years.
Yeah, Alicia, do you want to come in? I mean, it's always, the death penalty is always an interesting one to me. And people talk about popular opinion. A lot of polling always says more than half the population wanted it. Doesn't mean it's a good idea. But anyway, that's to do with the political will of people sometimes in a democracy. For another time, Alicia, on Southport.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tragedy, as Danny has mentioned, and again, it's coming back to what is the truth of what took place, what happened. So the cover up initially, or how it was proceeded, that led on to multiple riots, both within the community originally, was that, Axel was a refugee, Rwanda, small boat crossing, disinformation spread. Social media became the platform of hate, division, and chaos. And in the midst of that, a town, a community completely grieving at the loss of this tragedy. And then now that we have more information at the point of sentencing, the reality that many institutions had failed to collaborate and share information of the vulnerability of him as an individual, but also the vulnerability of those within his school, the community. And so that's what's led to kind of this public inquiry. And I think now the ongoing conversation will be how do we seek justice for the harm that's taken place? Lives have been lost, a community completely grieving in that, and conversations around the death penalty is one. The ongoing conversation around community cohesion and integration, the role of social media and that growing incel kind of population of isolation and hatred. There's conversations this week around kind of misogyny and whether that needs to be a formal kind of hate crime, because this was the targeted at vulnerability, women and girls, etc., like that. So this is going to be a messy conversation to unravel at a policy level, but also a society level as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's always this desire to find somebody to blame and somebody to point the finger at. And in the end, this young man himself was the one who committed the act. And the other piece that encouraged me slightly this week was, I think it was in Radio 4, one of the programs this morning, a church leader was on and just saying the churches have become more united in this moment, and they were engaged on the ground and responding to what is happening. So look, it may be a story we return to. There's one other we want to pick up just as we wrap up, with a couple of minutes to go, was just the assisted suicide conversation, partly because that's been back in committee stage this week. Kim Leadbeater's bill It's a private member's bill, therefore she essentially gets to run her own committee to simplify things for people like me. She's picked her own committee of people that are favourable to her largely, and then they were picking witnesses this week. Alicia, I'm going to come to you just on the, my sense was this was somewhat skewed in its process, and I've said that on social media. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely fair to say. I was listening and watching the debate in terms of, Tuesday was the first kind of sitting motion. It's where all committee members come together to discuss who will be called to give evidence, which will be this coming week. And in many ways, there was just a real strong rebuttal to evidence being given from medical experts, practitioners, palliative care from nations like Canada. They were ruled out holistically, but I think the one that really riled those committee members, Naz Shah, Danny Kruger, and Sojan Joseph, who are kind of in principle opposed to this legislation coming in, and those that are critiquing it, was around the Royal College of Psychiatrists, where this bill is very much a conversation about capacity, coercion, and consent. And at second reading, many of the MPs said that they needed that to be explored with greater detail. And the committee at the time overwhelmingly said we will not take evidence from the Royal College of Psychiatrists because it's doubling up with the General Medical Council. And what was interesting, and just reflecting with other kind of campaign organisations and peers and MPs, is that the pushback on social media by the various kind of campaigning organisations, MPs that were in the room and those who were watching closely, convinced Kim Leadbeater to change that decision. And so the Royal College of Psychiatrists will be added to give evidence this coming week. And so a level of scrutiny is going to be had, but it just shows that the committee is stacked to move in one direction, that the bill's kind of amendments would be nominal, and that it will move through to third reading unchallenged.
It's really concerning that this committee, which was trumpeted as the place where the scrutiny and the work would happen, is instead likely to be just a foregone conclusion. And even the acceptance that the Royal College of Psychiatrists should give evidence demonstrates that this is Kim Leadbeater's show. Actually, the committee voted against including it. Next week, they will have to have a new motion, which the committee will have to vote on again in order to add the Royal College of Psychiatrists to the witness roster. So the 13 other MPs on that committee that voted for it will presumably change their vote because Kim Leadbeater has told them to. So the idea that there is any actual scrutiny or independence happening is a farce. We will be submitting evidence to this committee because we think it's important to say what we think about the bill, and we will encourage other people to submit evidence to say that. But confidence in this process is really low. And my hope is that it will frankly spook some MPs who voted for it because they might support it broadly or might want it to be considered further. It might remind them that actually this bill isn't getting any better. It's not likely to be amended significantly, and actually might encourage enough of them to vote against it when it returns to the whole of the House of Commons, probably at the end of April. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah, so I think they're bringing evidence from 8 other jurisdictions, 8 witnesses, all of whom are in favour of Kim Leadbeater's side. The lawyers, 9 lawyers coming, 6 are openly supportive, the other 3 are neutral. The other thing you said, that she's persuaded to change her mind seems strange to me because she didn't, ultimately, yes, there was pushback, but she didn't have to, and your point, Danny, about her power. But the thing is, she is not a powerful MP or in and of herself. This is what's, I think, strange. I still don't really understand how she's got so much, who's driving this? This is an issue she'd never spoken about before the ballot, as I understand it. Now she's driving an incredible agenda through here, and yet it seems so the whole process raises significant questions, and I'm glad it is publicly raising lots of questions, and there is pushback coming, because this is one of the most significant potential changes in legislation in the UK in terms of its reach and impact. It's going through one of the worst kind of processes. And so I want to say, look, I've said it on social media, say the same here. I think prophetically, logically, this is going through, and it's a really bad piece of legislation. And on every count, it will clear and go ahead. But I think prophetically we absolutely have to call out what is in the darkness, what is being hidden away. I think it is secretive the way it's operating. I think it's shocking the way it's tried to go private and take things off away from the public and kind of push this through. And there must be other forces at play behind the scenes for that to happen. And I say that somebody doesn't really go for that kind of thinking generally, but also that it is our role to call it out and to pray prophetically into this moment, because I just think it's so fundamentally wrong. I really have the sense it's not going to pass and go through. Again, logically, there's no grounds for that, but this is what we are called to do. And we're going to close just a little bit with Psalm 2. Psalm 1 is a wonderful call to put down our roots by the streams of living water. And in Psalm 2, we are reminded that the nations conspire and the kings of the earth set themselves up, whether you think that's President Trump or whether you think that's Kim Leadbeater and her bill. And the heavens sit and laugh to some extent at what's going on there. God laughs at them for their in derision at their own plans. And essentially says, look, it's what God says that will stand. It's what God says will last. And now, therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and with trembling. Kiss his feet, or he will be angry, and you will perish in the way. For his wrath is quickly kindled. Happy are those who take refuge in him. And so in the meta-modern moment, in the vibe shift, whatever you think's going on, whatever you see, whichever side you fall on Bishop Bud's kind of comments, and whatever you think of Donald Trump or Kim Leadbeater or the Southport inquiry and all the things that we have been talking about. And for each of us too, we want to submit ourselves and say, God, what are you doing? What is wise? What way should we be walking in this moment? For happy are those who take refuge in you. And we don't say that blindly, we don't say that easily, but we do say that in a week in which, again, there's so much going on in our news, and we take comfort in that, and we hope you do too. Please be praying for the team and the work that they're doing in Westminster and some of these causes. Please be praying particularly for those resources that we have released that are coming out, and please do get in touch and let us know what you think, and if there's anything you think we should be covering. We are back for Season 10. This was the first episode. Thank you for joining us. Be blessed.
Hi there, Alicia here. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, why not review, share with a friend, or contact us and leave a comment. Till the next episode, take care and God bless.